Here we are once again in the Jeremiah Bible study. Today we are in chapter 47, God's judgment on Philistia. So the question is, who are the Philistines? Well, the Philistines, they're known as the sea peoples. And we don't know exactly where they come from, but we have some idea. We do have, they have done excavations of Philistine cities. By the way, there's 5 cities of the Philistines. That is Gaza, yeah, and like as in the Gaza Strip today. Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath or Gat. Gath, that's the place where Goliath came from, actually. They've done excavations and they've found the various pottery, and the pottery is very much European-like. So we think these people came from Europe. We look at Genesis and we look at where the Philistines came from there after the Tower of Babel. We see that Philistia is essentially a son of Egypt. Yes, Egypt was a real person. His name is Mitzrayim, which is the Hebrew word for Egypt. But they eventually settled in probably Crete. This is a big island out in the Mediterranean. It's actually important in New Testament studies because Paul shipwrecked on the island of Crete. There's mentions of Cretans are liars, things like that. And but this would have been way back probably before the Egyptians even built the Great Pyramids, that they split off. As the Egyptians are not seafarers, they don't have a navy. They don't venture out into the Mediterranean Sea. They have boats, but they pretty much stay just in the Nile River with their boats. And so there's other various groups that have navies, not Egyptians. And this particular sea people invasion that goes to the Eastern Mediterranean area is coming with people with essentially Navy ships. And they're coming in the waves, and they're probably coming from various places. I've seen where people have identified up to 9 different nationalities of the sea peoples, the Philistines being maybe one of those 9 nationalities, and maybe sometimes the Philistines are like the name Philistine is now referring to all 9 of them, not just that one nationality. One of the clues for that is that they don't have the article. So you have the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Arameans, the Egyptians, and the Bible is just Philistines in Hebrew, not the Philistines. So it's kind of like a ambiguous kind of group of sea people. Now, how did these sea people get to where they are? They're not listed in the people when Joshua conquers the land, which makes me think maybe the Philistines weren't even there at that time, or they weren't there in their confederation of their 5 cities like they have now. Maybe they're just trading posts from these Europeans, maybe from Crete, who were had a little bit of foothold in the land, but they weren't really established as a nation at that time. What caused the sea peoples to flee wherever they were in the Greek world, or in Crete, or wherever they're coming from? What caused them to come to the eastern shores of the Mediterranean Sea? We don't know. Was there some kind of a calamity? Was there a collapse of governments? Was there natural disasters that maybe occurred at the same time? That would kind of make sense, that whatever it was, it made it unsafe or made it unprofitable or terrible living conditions in their homeland. But they had all these ships. They had these great ships. So they went and lived on their ships, and they went and conquered various areas or sacked various areas for supplies and for food. And we know that the sea peoples attacked the Hittites. We know that they attacked the nation of Cyprus. They attacked various places around Canaan. And we'll talk a little bit about where maybe they in a little bit later in this lesson about where they didn't attack, which seems a little bit suspicious. But they were they were a big nuisance. It might have even been the reason for the fall of the Hittite Empire, was because the devastation was so great from these sea peoples, these Philistines who are coming on these ships. But the Egyptians, actually under Ramses III, he was able to do away with these sea peoples. If I could read something here about what the Egyptians do. Oops. Hieroglyphic inscriptions from Ramses III, Pharaoh of Egypt, tells us the story of this how he defeated the sea peoples, aka Philistines. So it's called the Battle of the Delta, and he enticed them to come and take these naval ships that they have and bring them into the mouth of the Nile River. And he had an ambush waiting. He had his ships. Of course, they're not seafaring ships, but they did all right in the Nile where there wasn't big currents. He also had archers stationed on each side of the river. So they were able to attack from each side of the river with their archers, with their ships, and they were able to essentially sink these ships and capture all the people on board. One of the things about Egypt is they tolerate foreigners. They even invite foreigners in. They have foreign mercenaries all the time. But when foreigners get to be too numerous, they consider it a problem. So this goes back to the time of the Exodus. The Hebrews became too numerous. That's why they started with their policy of killing the young boys. These sea peoples were too numerous, and they were causing problems with their trading partners, the Hittites. Pharaoh Ramses even had gone up to try to support the Hittites, but then coaxed them into the Nile and defeated them there, sunk all their ships. And what does he do? Well, it seems like he settles them in their 5 cities. It seems like the Egyptians, according to these hieroglyphic inscriptions, actually get the Philistines settled in their 5 cities, which makes perfect sense for them. I mean, you've got some fertile land there that the Egyptians don't want to live there, because if under Egyptian mythology, if you die outside of Egypt, you might not be resurrected. So the Egyptians never really set up an empire outside of their own borders. And they were perfectly happy with having Philistines there. And remember, invasions always come from the north. So they could have a buffer from attacking armies from the north. So it actually makes sense that they helped the Philistines get established in the first place. If you think about historically, the Philistines have definitely been the enemies of Israel. Think about the time of Samson. But what we learn from Samson is that these cities do seem to be places where Israelites can just go and mingle. Like, they're open cities. Foreigners can come in and shop and go to the stores and and do whatever they want inside these Philistine cities. As far as the military goes, that was separate. And there was a time when the Israelites weren't allowed to. The military wouldn't allow the Israelites to have blacksmiths, because they were afraid that they'd develop weapons. But they just go down and they take their farming tools and they'd sharpen those in the Philistine cities to use as weapons against the Philistines and army. So there was definitely this divide between the civilian life of the Philistines and the military life of the Philistines. They were very welcoming to Canaanites as well. And it's thought that maybe after a generation or two, all the Philistines were now speaking Canaanite language. We have Goliath. He's the hero of the Philistines. And my thought is maybe if there's 9 nationalities of the Philistines, maybe one of the nationalities was a nationality of giants. At any rate, we do know that there were giants there, and definitely Goliath and his family were giants. And in excavations in Gath, they've found various names that seem to be similar etymologically to Goliath, which just reinforces what the Bible is saying is true. So these are the Philistines. They get subdued by David, and they're very weakened during the time of Solomon. But they have a resurgence after that when the kingdom of Israel is divided into Israel and Judah. But even after that, we do see where the Judites will go down. They broke down the walls in Gaza and in Ashdod or Ashkelon. And later you'll have Hezekiah goes to Gath and fights against the Philistines. So they're already weakened. But one of the things is we talked a lot in this study through these various weeks about the Assyrian invasion and how it affected Israel, and the Babylonian invasion, how it affected Judah. We didn't talk so much about how it affected the other nations around them. And the Assyrians really wreaked havoc upon the Philistines as well. And then when Nebuchadnezzar comes, he really puts an end to the Philistines. After Nebuchadnezzar attacks the Philistines, we don't hear anything else in history about Philistines. Now, of course, there's a huge population in Gaza today. Are they descendants of the Philistines? Perhaps not. Perhaps they're descendants of people who moved into those cities at later times. So, but at any rate, after Nebuchadnezzar, you don't ever have a group of people in Philistia who are a coherent people called the Philistines anymore. You may be aware that the word Palestine is essentially a version of Philistine. The P and F are very interchangeable in a lot of religions, especially in the Middle East, or languages, especially in the Middle East. But Israel was renamed Palestine by Hadrian of Roman Empire way later, and he did that as punishment to the Jews. He called the land the name of Israel's arch enemy from the past as punishment. So there's really no connection between Philistia and Palestine, but if you listen like to the radio in Israel today, often I hear the word Philistines. That's the Hebrew word for Palestinian. So it's the same name, but there's really no connection to that people that we know of. Like I said, unless the people in Gaza are descendants of the Philistines, but it's also quite likely that they're actually descendants of people who entered that land and occupied just the area where the Philistines used to be. So let's get back to our passage. Chapter 47, verse 1. The word of the Lord that came to Jeremiah the prophet against the Philistines before Pharaoh attacked Gaza. We don't know when this actually happened. But we could probably make a guess at it. This would have to been a time when Pharaoh would have attacked Gaza during Jeremiah's lifetime, probably a time when the Egyptian army was moving into that area anyway. In other words, while they had their army out and they were maneuvering in the land of Israel, in the land of Judah, or around the land of Judah, they sacked Gaza at some point. So there were 2 time periods in which case this was true, and we talked about one of them last time, and that was when the Egyptians came up to fight or to join the Assyrian army at Carchemish way up in the north, and to try to hold the Babylonians on the other side of the Euphrates River. And this particular episode, that's when, if you remember from last week, that's when Josiah lost his life. While the Egyptians were going up to fight or to defend, essentially, the city of Carchemish against the Babylonians, Josiah, the king, went out to fight against them. And Pharaoh even sent word to him and said, "Oh, what's going on here, Josiah? My fight's not with you." But just nevertheless, Josiah fought the Egyptian army anyway, and because of this foolish thing, he ended up dying in this particular battle. So it could have been at that same time. And in fact, I would argue, based upon this passage, that it probably was that same time, because what we're going to see is that the poetry is very similar to the beginning of chapter 46 that we saw last time. So this, if you remember from 46, we flip back to Jeremiah 46, verse 2, against Egypt, concerning the army of Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, which was by the river Euphrates in Carchemish, in which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, defeated in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah. Based on this poetry, similar poetry, it would make sense that this probably happened at that time. The other possibility, remember we talked about when the Babylonians had sieged Jerusalem and they stopped the siege for a minute. The people had even made a covenant. They had released their slaves, and then suddenly the Babylonians left the walls, and they're like, "Oh, we want our slaves back now." But it was only temporary, because the army of Egypt had come up out of Egypt. They were hoping to catch the Babylonians off guard while they were sieging Jerusalem and have a surprise attack from behind. But the Babylonians must have had scouts, and they knew that the Egyptians were coming ahead of time. And they departed from their siege and set up at a better place to fight the Egyptians. Once the Egyptians realized what was going on, that they weren't going to take the Babylonians' surprise attack, they turned around and went back to Egypt. So maybe at that time they also said, "Well, let's not make it a wasted trip. Let's sack Gaza while we're here," or could have even been both times. But in my opinion, it was probably that first one, based upon the poetry in this passage, and also it doesn't seems strange that they would turn the tail and be running from the Babylonians and then take the time to sack Gaza on the way. It's almost like the Babylonians could have caught up with them there and done the same thing to them, which they were trying to do, the Babylonian army besieging Jerusalem. So I think it was the first one. I think it was Pharaoh Necho, and that was the time when they went up out of Egypt to go join the last Assyrian army and hold back the Babylonians. So let's see what the Lord has for judgment against the Philistines. Verse 2, "Thus says the Lord, behold, waters rise out of the north, and shall be an overflowing flood. They shall overflow the land and all that is in it, the city and those who dwell within. Then the men shall cry, and all the inhabitants of the land shall wail." This rising of the water reminds me of last week when we were in Jeremiah chapter 46. Look at Jeremiah 46:8. In my Bible, it's open to the same page. "Egypt rises up like a flood, and its waters move like the rivers. And he says, I will go up and cover the earth. I will destroy the city and its inhabitants." Last week, I talked about how this was a reference to a poetical reference to the Nile and how it would rise and fall. And this was the source of prosperity for Egypt, and that they always got this topsoil flowing down to the delta where they were able to grow more food than what they needed, and they could use the excess food to feed the army and feed the priesthood, and even have enough left to trade to get gold and various things to fill those pyramids up. So it sounds a lot like that, this idea of the waters rising, comparing the waters flowing and retreating as armies flowing out, covering the land, and then retreating. Would make sense to me. But I guess this could have also fit that second time period as well. Pharaoh's army went out to fight the Babylonians, chickened out and went back, receded. Verse 3, at the noise of the stamping hooves of his strong horses, at the rushing of his chariots, as the rumbling of his wheels, the fathers will not look back for their children, lacking courage, because of the day that comes to plunder all the Philistines, to cut off from Tyre and Sidon every helper who remains, for the Lord shall plunder the Philistines, the remnant of the country of Caphtor. Remember I said earlier, we'll talk about where the sea people didn't attack? Strangely, I saw no, when I did my research, I saw no evidence that they had attacked the Phoenicians. I've talked before about Phoenicians. I don't know if it was in this Bible study, but the Phoenicians were essentially a Canaanite people that lived in the north, but not too far north, and they lived along the sea. They had cities like Tyre and Sidon. Tyre had a little island out there. It was very difficult to be conquered. The Greeks later do it, but they have to build a land bridge actually out. They're so determined to conquer Tyre. Tyre and Sidon had they were sea people from the east, from the Eastern Mediterranean, who traded all around the Mediterranean. And they probably even had like their various towns that they had settled in very far off in Tarshish and probably in North Africa. So they probably knew these sea peoples well. They knew the Philistines, the Philistines well. Maybe they were even the ones who invited the Philistines to come to this area when they found out that there was problems with them. And it seemed like they were spared when the Hittites got it, when Cyprus got sacked, and when they attacked Egypt. Of course, Egypt turned the tides on them, literally. But so interesting. It seemed like they were friends, and based on this passage, there must have been some Philistines who were living in Phoenician cities, and God says even there they're not going to be safe. Verse 5, baldness has come upon Gaza. Ashkelon is cut off with the remnant of the valley. How long will you cut yourself? This refers to the Middle Eastern custom of shaving one's head when you're really, really grieving, when you're really, really upset and down on yourself, that everything's bleak, that terrible things have happened to you. You shave your head, and you might even cut yourself. And we're going to see this happen with some of the other nations when they're judged towards the end of Jeremiah as well. We're going to see this actually next week in Moab. Verse 6, O you sword of the Lord, how long until you are quiet? Put yourself up into the scabbard. Rest and be still. How can it be quiet, seeing the Lord has given it a charge against Ashkelon and against the seashore? There he has appointed it. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.